One answer to the question why we should have tort law is utility. That is, society is better off overall if people can bring lawsuits to require other people to pay for damages that they caused in some sense. I want to illustrate a utilitarian way of thinking with the case of Mrs. Scola, right? The waitress who had the Coke bottle explode in her hand. Now, some people look at this and say, now wait a minute. Coca-Cola was as careful as they could possibly be, right? As careful as anyone would expect them to be. This just happens sometimes. Why should they have to pay for the injury? Here's one answer, right? And this answer is of the form, society's better off if they have to pay in that kind of case. It goes something like this. It's just one sample of a utilitarian answer. Well, ask yourself, if there's this minuscule chance of bottles exploding, will that stop you from buying glass bottles of Coca-Cola? Probably not. Since most of us are willing to do things like drive, okay, we're willing to take that kind of risk, especially when it's so minuscule that we'll be the one that suffers the injury. But notice there's a kind of irony here. With everyone thinking this, right, well, that's such a small risk, it's worth taking it. When millions of people think that, the risk is likely to happen somewhere, somehow. Which, if you know certain branches of social theory, you know that this is kind of a puzzle people look at. There's cases in which it seems rational for everyone to run this risk, but sometimes it turns out that overall, the damage that's done by the few cases where it's happened is very serious. Now note what someone might say here. They might say, well, you know, the people that are in a best position to assess the likely overall amount of damage are the people who run Coca-Cola itself. Because they're sitting there saying, we know the statistics, we know the likelihood of injury, we know how severe the injuries are likely to be, and we're in a position to judge whether overall the risks outweigh the benefits. But of course, you have to get them to act on that knowledge, right? And the thing that would block them from acting on that knowledge is the fact that someone else is going to have to deal with the injuries, right? At first glance, all Coca-Cola sees is the income that comes into them, right? And they have no direct incentive to worry about the injuries that would be borne by other people. But we can fix that by establishing rules in advance that say that when the injuries occur, Coca-Cola is going to have to pay for the damages. So now Coca-Cola is going to say, oh shoot, we have to deal with all of the damage across the country from exploding Coke bottles. And they're in a position to say, is the damage so great that it outweighs the benefits of putting out these Coke bottles? And they can make a rational decision. Now that's assuming, right, that their income is actually reflective of the benefits to the public, etc. So there's a lot of assumptions there. But notice the idea here. The idea is that when we think about how people are going to behave, we get the best kind of behavior, or the behavior that's most useful to society, when we put rules in advance that shift the cost of injuries onto the manufacturer. So the tort law becomes a tool for getting people in general to behave in the ways that are most beneficial to society as a whole. That's a utilitarian justification for tort law.